Hey, everybody. Greetings to you all. It's Alexia with Coco Life Black. No, you're not in the wrong place. I'm just all over the place, quite honestly. And I'm so excited to be with you here today amongst these amazing other women who are joining with us, but especially co-moderator and one of the lead conversationalists as it relates to this conversation. She's got a lot of history with it, a lot of experience. So we're so excited to have this conversation. And welcome to What's the Chew? We're going to explain it all. Don't worry. It's not something that you've missed. We'll be right here. And we are listening to I Will Survive by Gloria Gaynor. Now, I know this is an oldie but goodie, right? But it really speaks to and resonates with us as women, as Black women, especially in these environments that we have been able to overcome. So just vibe out with us for a little bit as you start your watch parties, as you invite other people to join in this amazing, amazing dialogue with us. Again, welcome to What's the Chew? I see a few people joining. Go ahead and drop some hearts in the chat. Drop some high fives in the chat. You're excited about this conversation. Very engaging experience that we are so excited to have with you today. And we won't be before you long, but don't worry. You're going to be looking for more and more conversation. Come on in, everybody. So excited to see you. So excited to see you. We do not own the rights to this music, so don't try to shut it down. We're good. We put that up. We got that scrolling around the bottom. But with that, let's get this party started. I'm going to hand it over to you, Patricia, so you can bring us on in.
So hi, everybody. I'm Patricia, and Alexia is my play daughter, and I'm so excited to be moderating with her. So what's the CHEW? Well, CHEW is a program of the African American Heritage Association of Virginia, and CHEW is culture, health, education, and wealth. And that is very pivotal to who we are, not what we are called, but who we are. And it dates back actually to the transatlantic slave trade with respect to this title, Call and Response. You've heard it in church, I'm sure, and we've heard it in music. We've also heard it on the chain gangs that they had our men subjected to. So we're going to talk about that from our stories, from our perspectives. It's our truth as we see our truth. And we have 5 or 6. How many women do we have today, Alexia? Can you count?
Yes, we have 2, 4, 5 with the 5 and a possible. It's like a spades game.
We have 5 women who are intergenerational, who are going to address topics that are germane to today's topic relative to culture, our history. And you're in for an exciting dialogue. We ask you to dialogue along with us, meaning as they talk, please, please, please ask questions, give statements. This is about us for us. And as Alexia mentioned, she's the co-moderator of this program. And we're going to just be going back and forth with respect to the questions and the dialogues.
All right. So with that, let's go ahead and join in with our amazing panelists today. Please say hi, drop some hearts as they come on stage to Valerie, Monica, Brittany, Robin, and T.
What's up, ladies?
Hello, everybody. I know I said you can mute yourself, but you can come off mute to say hi. That's perfectly fine. You can come off mute to say hi to everybody.
Hello, good evening.
Hello, everybody.
Good afternoon.
Hello, everyone.
Yes, say hi, everybody. Again, we have Valerie on, Brittany, Robin, Monica, Tina, and T. We are so
excited. The E and the I are silent.
Right, the E and the I are silent. So excited for this conversation today. As Patricia said, welcome to What's the Chew? And just again, if you're just now joining us, because we do see some new people joining in, What's the Chew is an intergenerational dialogue centered around our experiences as Black women with culture, health, education, and wealth. That's right. And it's coin, so don't be trying to take it. All right, with that, I'm going to kick it over to you, Patricia, for our first question.
Thank you. And our first question is related to, of course, history. And our first panelist to talk about that is Valerie. So Valerie, thank you for joining us. And I want you also to tell a little bit about yourselves before you answer the question, please. But your question is, and by the way, Valerie actually wrote these questions, so she knows what they are. Why is an understanding of African and African American history important for Black people today? And what should that history include?
Patricia, thank you so much for the invitation to join you today and for this opportunity to share. Again, my name is Valerie Harrison. I am the Senior Advisor to the President of Temple University for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. I also am an adjunct professor at the university's law school and for undergraduate students and teach mainly in the area of race and the law. So that's sort of a quick background. And so the question of understanding African and African American history for Black people and its importance is the focus of much of my scholarship and my work. It's important for Black people, especially Black children, because we thrive when we have a healthy racial identity. In a nutshell, that means our achievement is linked to how we see ourselves. You know, there's a difference between telling a Black child that they started this life as an enslaved captive picking tobacco on a Virginia plantation, or as a king or queen who built the first great civilizations. The research tells us that confusion about racial identity has been linked to behavior problems, to psychological distress, to low self-esteem, and to low cultural esteem. But you know, Patricia, low cultural esteem can't really attach to you if you understand what real Blackness means. You know, in Africa, Black people formed well-developed communities and engaged in commerce and trade long before European and Arab people arrived on the continent. When you understand that Black people led the world in scientific innovation, that ancient Black African people moved and stacked millions of stones so perfectly that the Great Pyramid is one of the 7 wonders of the world. When you understand that Black African people developed the oldest mathematical textbook more than 3,900 years ago, then AP physics or going to med school is not really a stretch for you as a Black child. The liberation of Black people is really tied to an understanding of our history that doesn't portray us simply as oppressed people. Rather, all of our experience, with all of its complexity and its nuance on the continent of Africa, in the Americas, and throughout the diaspora, is really critical. We need to understand our capacity to love and forgive, for example, to resist and struggle, to produce and to create, and to be gracious and to be noble. That is as much a part of our legacy as the horrific experience of enslavement. And so how we see ourselves and our potential impacts what we do. But there's a second point that I wanted to make, was how we see others in relation to us is also important. When Black people are disadvantaged or marginalized or treated badly, we need to understand that it's not because something is wrong with us. Rather, it's because we live in this society that is consumed and driven by self-interest and really has really yet to reach the fullness of its humanity. And here's how that self-interest has played out. Despite the fact that humans are virtually 100% the same genetically, a false story was devised by white ruling class interests that paleness equaled superiority. They then attached worth and value. They ranked people. They provided opportunities simply based on how someone looked, in a way that unfairly disadvantaged Black individuals in communities and unfairly advantaged white individuals in communities. Black people need to understand that this resulted in a US system of slavery and legally mandated discrimination and oppression, but that this false story still impacts the overall quality of life for most Black people, even today. There are policies and practices that produce disadvantage for Black people in a variety of areas, including education. And that's mainly through the funding scheme. But I think Robin is going to talk also a little bit about how the bias that is ingrained in the teacher force, it creates low expectations for Black children. Also in employment, in criminal justice, and in healthcare. And so this brings me to another reason it's important to understand our history, and that is it's difficult to effectively solve present day problems if we don't have an understanding of the real nature of the problem. So history can be an important part of a better future, Patricia.
Definitely so. Definitely so. And thank you for that. Thank you so much. So, we say know your history, know your story. And there are a few people here. There's another young person here, our millennial, who is a teacher in education, high school actually. And I'd like to ask Brittany. Brittany, based on what you heard Valerie say, can you offer some additional insights?
Yes, I completely agree with what has been stated. I think one of the biggest things is getting our students to see themselves before we came here. And so I agree with you. I think about science and STEM, which is huge right now, and the racial gap in STEM and the gender gap. And I think about the fact that, as has been stated, we created STEM in many ways, and our students don't necessarily know that. And it's not to their fault. It's because society has made it that way, to where it feels like we are the imposters in a system that we actually built this. There, without us, there is nothing that we see around us. And so I do think that giving our students an opportunity, not just to have access to these different programs, but getting them to understand this is in your DNA, this is in the fiber of who you are. I think getting them to see that this is not a foreign thing to you, I think that makes a huge difference. And just getting them to understand their culture and their history, and getting them to see that they are already these mini inventors in their own way, especially in this new social media age. They are such creatives, and they don't necessarily get the praise that they deserve for being those innovators. And so I think that it is very important that they see the connection of the things that they are doing with the connection of their history and where they have come from.
Thank you for that. Is there anything from the audience?
Can I add into what she just said?
Certainly, definitely.
All of that, and I think that because of, like you were saying about the social media the social media world and all of that stuff, I know for the young folks that I've been working with, it has been like this culture that is goofy as heck to be smart. And so they have been dumbing themselves down, for the lack of better words, to be able to fit within these cultural norms that social media has created for them. And so, yes, it's important for them to know that they're, like you said, the STEM, founders, that we were kind of already birthed into like this knowledge base that we had no idea. And it's hard for us to kind of recognize that. But I know even for me, I'm like, well, dang, how did I even know how to do that? Some stuff is just embedded within our DNA that is not necessarily brought out, especially for students, because the teachers, you guys are like locked into this 28 days of February Black History Month. And if kids aren't like taught outside of what's just within that textbooks, which we know is selected, the people who write the textbook select what goes into that. And so if it's not within that curriculum, then it's not something that's known. And so we as the village and we as the community must jump in and help the school teachers and help the school students learn their history outside of those books, because we know that everything is in the inside of those books for us.
Thank you so much, T. I see we have a question from the audience. How do we as family/adults give our young children access to this knowledge? Any of you?
So Patricia, there are a couple of scholars who I would like to lift up and who have excellent resources for young people and old people as well. One is a mentor of mine, who is Dr. Malefi Asante, who is the chair of the Department of Africology and African American Studies at Temple University here in Philadelphia. He has a wonderful book called The History of Africa, The Quest for Eternal Harmony. But he also has a book called The African American People, a Global History, which helps young people to understand, again, that their history did not begin in 1619 on a Virginia tobacco plantation. Another resource that has been very helpful for me and that I think young people will love is Dr. C.H.E.W, who is a professor at Atlanta University, at Clark Atlanta University. His website is www.CHIKEAKUA, so that's CHE.net. He has some extraordinary resources on his website as well that I believe are helpful. So these are just two starting points. The wonderful thing about the internet is you can find a lot of resources. These are just two that I highly recommend.
Thank you so much. Any other questions?
I did see Monica had her finger up, so I want to lift her to the stage. And I am, just for everyone who's tuning in, just want to take a quick break, a pause, just to introduce this conversation again. I lifted up the website that Valerie just mentioned. Is down here on the bottom. It's also going to be in the chat. You can look there. But for those of you who are just tuning in, you are tuning into our third episode of What is the CHEW? And CHEW standing for culture, health, education, and wealth. And again, just to lift up for those who are just tuning in, this dialogue is an opportunity for us to intergenerational, as you can see, to have this conversation amongst Black women, amongst the history, the globe, because so many times we don't necessarily get a chance to hear all the wealth in a centralized location. We know it's out there, but just like how Valerie shared, Brittany shared, T shared, and the sharing will continue, there's so many resources. And so we are designing this to be kind of your one of your opportunities, a one-stop shop, if you will, where you can come in and have this access to the greatness that is you, that is us, as a people, for all people to recognize that. So just wanted to kind of lift that up and then hand it over to Monica. I know you had a question that you, or a statement, a comment that you wanted to give to.
Here. Hello, everyone. I had a comment, in reference to education, because the educational process in terms of lifting us up as a people is so important. But many of the times we're placing that responsibility on our parents or even our grandparents of those to teach us, where they may not have that information themselves. So as we move forward in this process, it's going to be important that we are able to reach back. And some of the resources that are available, those are found in Dabney. That is the reason why platforms such as this is important for those who are wanting the information. But one of the many challenges that I feel that we have in our community is that lack of information available to even share, with family members or even our children.
Thank you so much for lifting that up.
And let me just interject. I hope Monica will touch on that further in her talk, which comes up later. Question number 4, actually.
Yes. So let's keep the conversation going. The next question that we have, and again, we can circle back around to anyone, but I'm going to direct this one to Brittany as well to get started. And this question is, what do you say to those who believe that we are living in a colorblind or post-racial society and that revisiting history through a racial lens is no longer necessary? Do you agree with this approach or do you disagree?
Hello, everyone. My name is Brittany Flippin. I am a Richmond native and an urban educator, high school. And so eye rolls is always my response to any sort of we live in a colorblind society. Eye roll is the best way I can describe it. I think it is so egregious in the year 2021 with all that we've gone through for anyone to say that we live in a post-racial society. Especially as an urban educator, I invite those people to come to any major city, any Black, brown public school and say that we live in a post-racial society when literally 10 minutes down the road from where I teach and live, I am seeing these $1,000 million tech labs at some of these schools that are predominantly non-Black and brown versus the resources that we are borrowing and stealing from the city, begging them to give us these things. So I think we absolutely do not live in a post-racial society. If I'm being frank, I don't know that in the United States of America, we could ever be in a post-racial society. I don't think you can be in a post-racial society when that very society was built on the backs of slaves and stolen from natives. So I think that we will always have to contend with that. And it's something that we will always need to teach I know there's been debates all across the country about this critical race theory and these governors who are trying to get rid of that. And I just think in terms of education, it's just so detrimental to our society. The colorblind issue, I think there was a certain generation in a time where people really maybe thought in their minds that saying I don't see race was their way of saying I'm not racist. But I think we all know that is not true at all. I want you to see my race because my brown skin is beautiful, and Asian skin and Latinos, all of that is beautiful. And so the idea that you don't see my skin means you don't see me. I want you to see me. And so my question is always, when I hear colorblind, why do you not have to see my race to treat me well? It's almost like, why can you not see my color and who I am and still treat me the way I should be treated? Like, you shouldn't have to just block me out and say, oh, we all bleed the same blood, to say, okay, now let me treat you the same way as I would treat anyone else. Why are our differences an issue? And so I think that we cannot teach this new generation, well, everybody's the same, so just treat everyone the same. We all go through the same struggles. No, teach people that there are differences. We all bring different things. We do this whole, we're a melting pot in America. So it's like we pick and choose when we want to be this melting pot. We pick and choose when we want to be all these different stripes and all these different colors that add to this beautiful multicultural blanket. But then when we get down to the nitty gritty of what it means to be of a different hue, we don't want to speak about that. And then it becomes, oh, we're just all the same. Let's kumbaya. And so I think it's very important that we are teaching our white counterparts and their children that, hey, you need to be able to see people for their differences and still treat them the way you would want to be treated. And so I think it does go back to education a lot, but to those who say we are in a post-racial society, again, I invite you to come into these spaces where I am treated differently for the color of my skin, these spaces where, like I said, we are beg, borrowing, and stealing just to get the scraps of what we are owed. And so those are my thoughts on that.
Thank you, Brittany. You, everybody's nodding their head and shaking, and we absolutely understand. And I think that has been something, especially for this generation coming up. And there's not the other thing I just want to lift up too. There's not a battle of who's the baddest generation. Let me start there.
Right.
So I think sometimes, and I've seen those t-shirts and it sounds cute and all, but like, I am not my ancestor, these hands. Your ancestors is why you can be these hands.
I hate those pictures. I despise those t-shirts. I think they are the most disgusting things ever. I've had these conversations.
Right. And so one of the things of the many that you said that, it echoes all of these sentiments is, I know in New Jersey. So in New Jersey, there has now been issued the Amistad Law. And so the Amistad Law is designed to put more emphasis in African-American history being taught in schools. And there's a whole lot more that kind of comes with it. But essentially, it's supposed to be an opportunity to show from a policy level that, hey, we do see there's value. We do see there's importance. And this is for you. But then I know that there's other panelists who may also want to speak to it. So, give us if you want to come on. But what is your perspective on states taking this sort of position, like an intentional position to influence this conversation around African-American history or Black history?
Yeah, I think, like I said, when I think about those critical race theory laws and how they're outlawing that, I'm always angered by the fact that it's never Black and brown voices who are making these policies. And so it's hard for me to be invested in a policy that is claiming to, we're going to discuss race, but it's not coming from a lens of the people who have been oppressed. And so I'm always leery. I'm always challenging these different groups who, are claiming to make their efforts for these things, but they're not having the people in the room who are actually affected by it.
Thank you so much for that. And I just included like the link. Many of you probably have already Googled it, but I just included the link to where you can see more information about it. Anybody else want to just speak on this subject? Again, the first question that we position, or our second question in this conversation, but also anything relative to being colorblind or us being in a post-racial society, just your feedback from any of the other panelists. All right, T, bring you on.
I had a couple things jotted down that I wanted to bring back around. The first one that I have down is that color doesn't matter until it needs to. And so that's that whole general thing of like, we just are, all of us are God's people and we bleed red and we're all the same. That makes it more digestible for folks to be able to see generalization than seeing folks for the color, and the hue that we are, as our sister just nicely said. And so I think that is one of those things that is more digestible if we don't see color. Color doesn't matter until it needs to. And I think even in, our community, we've had folks and celebrities who, let me see the nice way to say this, that kind of didn't want to wear their hue as a symbol of pride. And so, they kind of got away from their blackness until they needed to realize that they were Black. Society reminded them that they still fall into this category with us, regardless of how much money they make. And so then it was learning of things like, oh, now it's relevant to me because, I'm in this situation. And I wanted to kind of lift up a controversial, this is probably gonna be controversial, but I think that's why I'm here. The Kirk Franklin of the group. So the T-shirt, "We Not Our Ancestors, You Can Catch These Hands." I know y'all don't like the shirt, but I love it. And so I'm gonna give you my kind of explanation of why I got the shirt and why I wear the shirt. So for me, it's kind of like we're not our ancestors, because if you think back to like my great grandmother age, she would have been the ones who was sitting home while the men kind of went out there and kind of did the social justice work, the civil rights work, and all of that stuff. The grandmothers were the ones that were sitting at the counter, kind of taking all of this punishment from the white people and like, the fire hoses and the spitting in the face and kind of not really responding as much. I wear the shirt to let them know that I'm not neither one of them grandmothers of mine. Because if you come in my face and it ain't gonna be I'm not taking no attacks, I'm not taking no spit, and I'm not holding no tongue, I'm going to be the one that probably going to end up the hashtag, because I'm going to say what I need to feel. And so my shirt is me, not my ancestors. It's not downplaying the work that the ancestors before me has done, but to know that now we're at this revolutionary phase of like, okay, so the talking we tried, the walking we tried, the protesting we tried. And so now it's like, you come this way, I'm going to give you what you're coming for. And so that's kind of why I wear the shirt. And it's not a disrespect for the ancestors, because I know because of them is why we're here. And actually why we're kind of more engaged and more riled up at like the stuff that they had to fight. We're fighting it now just in another year, and it has a different look, but it's the same trauma.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think to that point, definitely not, my approach to it is also to wanting the youth to understand that it's strategy, right? And so just like back then during the civil rights, not everybody was sitting there, not everybody was kind of sitting there. That's where the Black Panther, I'm gonna leave that.
That's true.
But nevertheless, want them to also understand that, because of all these open doors that the ancestors have created, you can fight in so many different ways that can be way more punitive, like your dollar. Like Juneteenth is coming up, and I know we're going to go on with these conversations. So it's just being, strategic is the goal. So we want you to just really think about what is the impasse, and what's the impact going to be.
Let me just mention that you make a good point, because it's going to take all of us, the village, if you will, to bring the change. And we each have the unique kinds of skill sets, if you will. And some of us have to just be the one who goes through the door like a thief in the darkness, and they don't even know who they let in the door. So it's that kind of stuff. We don't all have to be protesting. Some of us can use other kinds, as you mentioned, of strategies.
Yep.
All right. Thank you so much for that. Patricia, since you're already there, I'm going to give it back to you for our third question.
Okay. In the area of education, we know that stereotypic threats hinder performance when students lack a strong sense of racial pride. Is there a role that history can play in addressing this issue and setting Black children up for academic success? And that is Robin's question. And Robin, if you can tell us something about you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Robin Murphy, and I am a coach in many ways. I am a literacy coach in my day job and a relationship and life coach in my other half of the day. But today I'm speaking to you from the education perspective. I believe I'm going to answer this question in two different parts. The first part is educators need to be educated about what they should be doing to make sure that our Black and brown children see themselves throughout the curriculum. And so there's a wonderful book called Cultivating Genius by Dr. Goldie Muhammad that lots of school systems, including the School District of Philadelphia, are going to start embracing so that they are coming to the classrooms equipped with culturally responsive language and lessons that will help our children to excel in the system. The other part is that there has to be a place for history that we all embrace for children. So whether you're the parent, the grandparent, the neighbor, the auntie, whoever you are, there is a place for you to make sure that children understand the history that they come from, like we've all been saying. But the history could be 10 years ago. The history could be 20 years ago as well. It's all history. And I think it's important that we put in front of our children people and information that will help them to see something that they can and should be aspiring to. I always remember as a child in the 60s and the 70s, our pediatrician was a Black man. So I always knew Black people could be doctors. That was never foreign to me. I always knew that because that's who my doctor was. And so as often as we can make sure that children have these people in view, that they get to know these people, that they talk to these people. There's so many unfortunate times where our folks will say, you know, I got this, don't talk to my child. And I think we wind up cutting our children off from some information that they could be getting, from some experiences they could be having that would link their future to our history.
Definitely so. So you're talking about those African-American influencers, and you're talking about what you were raised on. And that's very interesting and very insightful, because what happens in a multicultural society with respect to African-American children? Can you address that? How do they learn or appreciate or model what others of their culture have done successfully, what the challenges might have been and how they overcame them when they are looking at other people and their cultures, or being educated by them even?
Exactly. So I think it goes both ways. The multicultural society needs to see everyone as an academic, everyone as someone that has intellect, everyone as somebody that is intelligent, regardless of race. But then we have to make sure for our children that we put those people intentionally in front of them so that they get to see it regardless of what everybody else is putting out there.
Good point. Thank you.
I just want to lift up a couple of things from the audience, Sister Robin, while you still have the floor. One thing, don't forget to take field trips in order to make learning our history a fun experience for our youth, like the Great Blacks and Wax Museum in Baltimore. I remember going to that on a church trip. So my mom used to organize all of these church trips that we would go to. And one of them was like to Michigan or to Detroit to see the Underground Railroad tour up there. But one was to the Great Black Wax Museum, and it's still in existence to this day. And it's not at all expensive to go to. And we make resources for everything else. And then another question that came up from the audience is, what is the foundational history that you would say, and this could vary for all of the panelists, so if you have a thought, please But what is the foundational history we need to know?
So it's going to sound crazy, but it's everything. And so obviously we cannot teach and expose our children to every little thing. But I also think it's really important that we expose them to enough pieces of it throughout, so that it's not only the ancient history that they get, but sometimes it's the 20 years ago history they get and everything in between, so that they don't only see it as one thing.
Mm, mm.
And I agree. I agree with Robin, and thank you so much for the earlier comments about the T-shirt. I didn't know about the T-shirt, but the discussion was wonderful because it highlights the nuances of our experiences. It is important for young people to know that this is not the first time that we have fought. I mean, they need to understand and know about the Afro-Iraqi rebellion that was in the 9th century. It's not the first time we stood up. They need to know about Queen Nanny holding back the British in Jamaica in the 18th century, and then Queen Nzinga resisting the Portuguese slave trade in Angola, Toussaint Louverture, and the Haitian Revolution. So there is a legacy that we have inherited of resistance against racism. Sometimes that has taken different forms, but it's important that we understand that legacy. So it's because we can learn from that. There are things that we can learn because, again, nothing is new. Much of it has been done.
And all that you just said, sis, sounds completely foreign, even to me. Like the names you just mentioned, I'm writing them down. I didn't learn about any of that.
I'm going to put those in the chat. Thank you so much. That is, so I so appreciated your comments because you guys demonstrate the nuance. But I'm going to just give a list of those examples of that's the legacy. Our ancestors, Queen Nanny, Queen Nzinga, Toussaint Louverture, those are our ancestors. And I just think it's important that we know that.
It's very
and we do. Listen, we need those names because those not the names that I learned in school. Right. Those not the names I learned in my 28 days of Black history every February.
Right.
And so knowing those warrior names and knowing the history behind those warrior movements, it allows us to be able to put the history into context of what we're even fighting today. So yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Great.
Yes, definitely so.
I just want to
had her hand up.
Yep, I see Brittany, and then I also have something for Sister Monica, but I wanted to lift up this audience position, and we were kind of getting into that conversation. But it says we speak from an idealistic position and want to look at more practical solutions. And so I think one of the things, and I'll Valerie, as you put those in, I'll transfer those on too so everyone can see. But if you could, just in it yourself, Valerie, or anyone else who wants to speak on it, what are your thoughts on that position? Like, yes, there are a number of names, a number of people. And if we think in terms of like our language that a lot of our millennials will be familiar with, like grassroots, what's the meat? Like, what does that mean? I know those people, but how do I make it happen? Yeah.
So I think that what needs to happen is that I think Patricia lifted up earlier when she was saying that there's all of these different ways, right? So everybody's not a protester. Everybody isn't a blogger or a writer or, a journalist. And so I think if we can respect each person's position in this movement and what role that they can play, then I think we will be able to collaborate a lot more and move a little bit further into progress instead of sometimes people knock other people's ways of doing things, but I think if we can collectively see that everybody has a role and everybody should have a position in this movement and respect that. And so that means that some people are going to have to be the thinkers. I tell people all the time, I'm an executor. So I'm the labor, I'm the goes. Tell me where to go and I'll go. Tell me what to do and I'll do it. But I don't necessarily have the mindset to kind of organize and strategize and get things in place. But if people say, oh, we have this protest going on tomorrow at such and such place, can you show up? I'm there. I'm showing up with the force. I'm showing up in movement. I'm showing up in action. But I recognize that that's not my strength. And so I fall in line with the people who kind of put things in order. And so I think if people put things in place and then you have the people that's action people, then you have the people that's going to do the follow up and the wrap up, kind of like any other business project. If people sit into their roles, then the roles will be able to be stretched out. The goal would be moved. The movement would be televised a little bit more if we were a little bit more collective and respectful of each other's roles.
Amen.
Yes.
Amen.
I would want to lift up, thank you so much for that, T, because one of the things that came up from the audience, which aligns with this too, is we want to link those people from the past with our contemporaries, right? So from the past and today, or as present as we can get. And the reason why I brought up and Brittany, I know you had something too that you wanted to add. So with that was something that came up from the audience. Another piece that came up from C.H.E.W is that one of the reasons why she knows, and that's a whole other conversation of should we encourage our kids to go to HBCUs or not, but I'm gonna save that for another time. But she says she only knows of a lot of those because she went to 2 different HBCUs. So that's another thing. But Brittany, I'm going to just kind of transition over to you. What was one of the things you wanted to add?
Just piggybacking off of what Sister Robin said in terms of thinking about this in the educational sense and stereotypes that are the stereotype threat from our students. I think you brought up the cultivating genius and the culturally relevant literacy and pedagogy. And I think that is a term that is thrown around a lot in educational circles and it's not executed enough. I think you, especially in your role as an educator, I think we both have seen where we've seen certain teachers and we're like, how are they teaching Black and brown students? Like, I'm confused. How is this? Like, we hear the things they say, the small things, and it's like, wait, how did they get through the screening process? And so I do think that in these educational circles, we talk so much about culturally relevant teaching and pedagogy, but we are not actively choosing people that need to be in front of Black and brown students. And because kids can spot at a very early age whether the teacher has expectations of them or does not. An elementary school child, I can promise y'all, can tell you if a teacher is treating them differently because of the color of their skin. And so these babies wake up and know immediately from a very young age that people that look like them, people have a certain perception of them. And so I think we definitely need to uplift them starting from the home, but we really have to hold this educational system accountable because I have been in way too many different school districts and seen people who have no business being in front of Black and brown children, and they've been there for like 10 and 15 years. And I'm like, you have educated generations of people, and what mindsets have you put in them? What have you not taught them because you didn't think they could do what a student across town could do? And you also mentioned having children see themselves in the curriculum. As a Spanish teacher, my first thing that I do every year is make sure kids know that more slaves were sent to Central, South America, and the Caribbean than the United States. And I tell them that because they think Spanish is a foreign language. And they're like, why am I learning this? And I'm like, literally, the only difference between many Latinos is that our boat landed in Virginia or South Carolina or North Carolina, and their boat went to Haiti and Puerto Rico and the Dominican Republic. And so for me, it's very important that my students see themselves in my curriculum and they see people that look like them. So they can say, okay, we actually have a shared history. We come from the same ancestors. I let them know that these different parts of the world, because TV is only going to show them a certain type of Latino. And so I make sure I let them know that there are people who look just like you, who speak a different language. And so this is not a foreign language. This is a world language. And this is why this is important to your development. And I think our schools, we have to do better in our textbooks, but teachers need to do that work themselves and make sure that when they're teaching a room full of Black students, that you are not just teaching them about all these white scientists. Like, they have to know that their people are capable of the same things. And I think that will help alleviate this stereotype threat that we see in our students where they internalize thinking that they can't do certain things.
Wow. You made me think of a lot because, if we don't tell our stories, who will? Because we certainly very often can't depend on people from another culture, white culture, to tell our stories because you don't know how they were raised. I mean, the racism is generational with them. And it refutes to tell our true story, refutes what they've been trained to believe. Just wanted to add that.
Absolutely.
And I just want to add, it was until we basically, Brittany, weed out the old folks or the old way and then get folks into the new way. And a lot of this is going to have to happen when there is a revamping of the teacher education programs, because that's where they need to learn it before they even get to the classroom if they hadn't learned it previously. So it's going to take a minute.
Mm-hmm.
It's not going to be fast.
While you're up there, Coach Robin, just want to lift up one of the things that came from the audience. Maybe you want to speak towards it too, and then any of the other panelists. But from the audience, how do we build the mental and emotional strength of our youth and adults? So as we're talking about being informed, being able to move and mobilize, whatever that way looks like. So like we talked about, whatever your gift, whatever your purpose may be to execute on, but how do we build the mental and emotional strength of our youth and adults?
Hold on, before Coach Robert answer, can I just lift up that these are some amazing questions. And when you just read this question, I looked at the screen and everybody's head did like that. Everybody's head did like that. It's kind of like the question hit the spirit. Everybody was like, who going first? But not me. I just wanted to lift that up. That it was a great question. But back to Coach Robert.
So it's one of those things, like I said, it's going to take some time. First, the folks have to be ready and willing to get the information. Sometimes these things are put out there and nobody shows up. So you have to be ready and willing to get the knowledge. That's what's going to be helpful. The more you know, the stronger you get, and the more you're ready and willing to share with everybody else.
That is spot on. Before we move on to our fourth question, does anybody else want to take or have any feedback for that one from the audience around building up our mental and emotional strength, helping to strengthen our young youth and adults? Nope. They're like, nope, no, thank you. Pass.
I think it's okay to teach our kids that it's okay to not be okay.
Mm.
And I think that's
literally about to say that. That's so crazy.
Right.
Yep. I think that's the biggest thing, of teaching them that it's okay to not be okay. And I felt like, I didn't learn that till I was in my 30s. And so if the kids can learn that early on, then they'll be able to kind of get their toolbox in place a little bit sooner for their mental health stuff. Yeah, I think that's kind of what my tool thing is. It's okay to not be okay.
Yeah, I can tell you, having taught through the pandemic, we're going to have a generation of trauma that I think people aren't ready for. And so I just, from the educator perspective, literally seeing these students through the computer every day, they are very much struggling. And even when we get back to normalcy, that struggle isn't going to go away. And so I think it's going to be very important that we are trying to build these amazing Black and brown babies, but we have to make sure we are supporting their mental health, because you cannot grow in any other area if you don't know how to take care of you. And so I really just encourage people to reach out to the young folk, as they are called, and understand that they are going to exhibit a lot of signs of trauma for the next 5, 10, 15 years, and to really, really be patient with them. Because what they have gone through in the last year and a half, is not going to go away overnight. And so I really think that support system from the elders is going to be super important, because you're going to see a lot of things exhibited in a lot of different ways from students from all different age groups. And they're not necessarily going to know how to express to you what's going on. And so I just think it's really important that we really understand that while we're trying to pour this history into them and get them to be entrepreneurs and all these other things, we really have to be conscious of the fact that in their own way, they have gone through something that we never have. And we really just need to make sure we support them mentally.
So give the few things in this audience I have to lift up. So give them the space and the grace. Actually, something that I even say when I do training for persons who care for the aging community. I say the same thing as you're working with them. Give them the space and the grace, because it's true. I say all the time, I can't wait to see the studies that come from this. But something that came up from our audience, because this goes back to how we can support and build emotional and mental strength. In order to build emotional and mental strength, you yourself have to be in that place. And so
Oh,
it's that, common saying, hurt people hurt people. You can't pour from an empty cup. Be conscious of the naked man who offers you his shirt. I mean, the proverbs and the messages go on and on about putting on your mask first, right? Securing your mask, making sure that you can breathe before you go. Even if it's simultaneously, even if you're like this, okay, let me try to share. We understand everything may not be able to go as stair step in that, but that was something important. Also, kids learn what they live. So also model what you want them to be. And I feel like my mom with this, because she used to always say, as my dad used to say, and now I feel like I'm doing the same thing. But I remember her always saying, more is caught than taught about when it comes to our youth and our kids.
oh,
And
that's a good
so
one.
we are not necessarily in the environment. We talked about this earlier with some Black men, about you can just do as I say, not as I do. There's more to come. And so then Ray Eartha says, not only provide info for our babies, but encourage them to seek information to gain their own knowledge of cultures past. So, sharing these resources that even us as adults may not have heard of, and then kind of that whole send the elevator back down, is really important. And then have age appropriate convo with them about emotional balance and wellness. So just those few things, as we move into question number 4. And this question is actually for Monica. So before I get to the question, I just want to kind of set the stage. What happened in 2020 and the first few weeks of 2021 shined a light on what we already knew. COVID-19 was another example of Black people disproportionately impacted by disease. African Americans are getting sicker and dying at disproportionately higher rates from COVID-19 for a number of multifaceted and complex reasons, including racism. And we know the horrific violence of racism that includes the deaths of millions of Black people during the transatlantic slave trade. We know that includes in the ongoing violence against Black people in the 20th and 21st centuries. So the question is, how have you processed these events, especially the ones that hit in 2020 and 2021?
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you, Lex. And the conversation is just so amazing. I wanted to jump in everywhere, but I wanted to make sure that everyone had enough time to, get through their respective questions and to address the topics that you had. But what I want to say really is important in understanding from the perspective of what has happened in the last year with the pandemic and our general understanding of what's happening in our community and the racial disparities and the disproportionate part of it, is that it's really systemic in nature. There are these systemic triggers that have led to certain behaviors that made us more susceptible to being more ill as a result of COVID and catching COVID, and it's just a lot of things. But before I go there, I just kind of want to share from the perspective of what happened when we shut down. So March 14th was the actual day that really essentially this part of the country shut down. We all left our offices. We went to our home if we had the opportunity to do that. Children actually did not come back from spring break, or they went home if they were in school. And from there, we had to transition as a country, as a globe, to the understanding of a pandemic. But we as African Americans did it from a different perspective as a part of this country here. So while all of us was transitioning, again, I want to go back to those systemic triggers that have led to these certain behaviors. The lack of access to opportunity for equitable health care, both through employment opportunities, environmental, and just information and historical access is some of the things that have caused that. Black people overall being historically extraordinarily exposed to impoverished situations that really looks at healthcare very differently than most people. And so we look at it from that perspective based on the class situation, and it's based on class. So the wraparound health that is typical in white communities, such as exposure to preventative health screenings, by annual dental visits and visits to the eye doctor. Those are things that are not a part of many in our African American experience, particularly those that are impoverished. And because of that, those three things typically can identify certain issues such as hypertension, diabetes, growth, just by simply going to an eye doctor. I had a friend that just told me yesterday that her mother actually goes to the eye doctor and she had cancer. And by them examining her eyes, they were able to see that the growth had gone to her brain just by that. And so she was immediately referred to someone to look at that. So those are some of the things that we don't have access to. And also, in terms of vision and healthcare, most of our doctor visits are through the emergency rooms. So by the time we get there, our diabetes, our A1C counts over 1560, we're either in a coma or we're at stroke level with our hypertension. So it's out of control. You're at level 2 of hypertension, those silent killer things that we, don't oversee. And then not to mention the access to medicine. And then all of those things culminating into pulmonary issues that resulted in the horrific damage that happened to African Americans during this COVID situation. And I don't think today in 2021, probably this time last year, we probably couldn't attribute much of this to anyone that we knew, but I don't think anyone in this panel can say that they don't know anyone that actually died of COVID. So, that was pretty close to them. So it's important to really realize that these systemic triggers that are based on racial biases are it brought to the forefront in this country, the disproportionate need for African Americans really to look at and for them to understand too, that what they consider to be normal is not normal. And that although white people were dying at a rate as well, we died more, or we were more impacted by these diseases, but it's because of those systemic triggers that, that leads to those type of behaviors that allowed us to be in the situation as we move forward. So while we're looking at that, another thing I want to add to this too, and I know I'm kind of getting caught up in the medical aspect of it, but the reason why it's so important also is because the systemic aspect of the racism that is permeated in all aspects of this country is also bridged into our DNA. And there are some biological and neurological traumas that have followed us in the 12 generations that we have been in this country. And so that discrimination, that lack of access to all of the things that we needed to be the most healthiest that we could be in this country has been brought to the forefront. And then we fast forward from March to the summer, where the death of George Floyd is now, making the news, and it's a part of our media feeds, and it's a part of this country's DNA. And so now we see everyone in the country trying to immediately address racial and social issues. So I do diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workplace. So everyone in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania is now, the governor, I want a plan on the table to address social and racial injustices in this country in 3 months. So I want every agency to get together and to address what has happened over 12 generations and over 400 years in this country. So there's, so while we appreciate that there is some opportunity to talk about the social, racial injustices, it never really falls into the fact that we'll get beyond this ideological understanding of what's really wrong and really have something truly implemented, because it's built so much into the system. So as we move into 2021 and we're moving out of the pandemic, what I don't want us to do as a nation and as Black people is, number one, understand that it's over and we can go back to what normal is, but really to take this time to reflect on the importance of understanding who we are, where we are in this country, and where we need to face. And so we as a people have to address, some of these triggers as well. And we also have to make everyone accountable of that. But we have to have a level of understanding ourselves as to really how deeply embedded these systemic triggers are into our society, into mainstream society. And we'll have to fight for them as we move forward on that.
Mm.
Well,
Wow.
let me interject. I'm sorry for interrupting,
Oh,
but
please do.
medical apartheid. First of all, with respect to COVID, as we all know, because I do health communications, there is a severe mistrust of the medical system. So although we were dying at high rates, we always die at high rates. Sometimes it's because we don't trust the doctors. We don't trust the hospitals, because we have been used historically since we got here as guinea pigs. And so now there is such a thrust to do these models. I saw where the president is working with the barbershops, doing outreach with the barbershops and the beauty salons. And of course, the Black church has always been pivotal to building trust. But we have to make sure that people aren't just coming to do campaigns, that they are really looking at systems change at the top level, because it's ridiculous. And then, of course, when ER being our doctor's office, we know how some of us have been treated in ER. People have died on the floor.
Absolutely. And there's medical biases, and we understand that too. If we're more educated, we understand that when we go into the doctor's office that we're actually probably looking up our our symptoms before we walk in there. So most of us are really halfway. I'm just telling you, we're halfway giving them advice on how to treat you, because if you go into doctors that are not persons of color, or even persons of color, you have to make sure that they have a general understanding of your biology, where you're coming from, and and what is happening with you. And so we still have that level of disproportionate access to more testing. If we're Black women, we're less likely to be recommended for those testing. And for some reason, there's a mindset that we have a higher threshold to pain than other women in society does as well. And those type of disparities go down to every person of color, when it comes to the access of that. But when you talk about the medical apartheid is parlayed also with our systemic understanding of how to access healthcare. So if we've grown up in an environment where if we're fortunate, we were fortunate enough to have private doctors, or have, medical plans where our parents would just pay a copay, or not. Many of us didn't go to the hospital until we broke an arm, or, until our fever was over 105. And then we were going to the hospital and seeing someone that didn't really have access to us. I will venture to say that many more are utilizing emergency rooms as their primary health care facility than anyone else. And so this is what raised to me to be one of the biggest concerns during the pandemic, and to understand that systemically that we are not where we need to be, and that even though we're trying to work on ourselves individually and collectively, there's so much to the African diaspora experience in America that we can only speak from the perspective of our understanding. And so Alexi and I had a conversation. I'm like, where do we start? Well, this is where I tell my workplace too. I'm just like, but and because it's so deep. But really, do it from where you understand. What do you understand about what's even happening in your own family? Who's in your own family? What's going on there? It has to be as minute and organic as that to get people to understand those things. And then if we have access, which I'm fortunate enough to have access to my very best friend who studied under Malefi Casey Asante. So I had access to her, who was able to give me understanding because she has a PhD in African American Studies from Temple. She provided me the access with, the Diop theory and all, Afrocentricity and Africology from that perspective. So, that's where we need to start. But again, this pandemic has really just taken the lid off of where we are in this country and really all of the ills that are there. And I will say this, the longer we stay here and not recognize that this thing is so systemic and we don't hold people accountable, the more the people in power win.
That's right.
And I say it because I think it's intentional to keep us exactly where we are.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. And that was, Monica, an amazing conversation that we had. I'm going to take this minute, to thank you for that conversation and to thank Patricia for connecting. But what she was referring of, that last piece of it, is we talked as we were embracing the centennial anniversary of the Tulsa massacre, the massacre in Tulsa, and how it impacted our community. And one of the things that Monica lifted up as we were discussing, like, how do we, what do we need to do? Like, how do we bridge this gap together? And I'm going to hand it to Patricia for our last question. But one of the things she says, we got to share. We have to share our history, holding it, embracing it. We know trauma is very difficult oftentimes to do. So we're not saying at the expense of yourself, but there are many conversations that many of our youth just don't know, like just aren't familiar with. And it's not ignorance, and it's not, well, if you want to keep something from Black people, put it in the book. It's not just as simple as that. It's coming together and offering each other as a resource. So thank you so much for that, Monica. And I don't, that was spot on with a lot of those points you hit. So I'll turn it over to you, Patricia.
Yes, and I just want to respond. A Facebook user said the Hispanic population also experiences healthcare disparities. Language is also a barrier. Yes, and we have done campaigns with Hispanic agencies in particular who are addressing those concerns through having culturally competent messaging primarily.
Thank you.
So the fifth and last question. History also teaches us how negative and distorted images of Black people have been used as a tool of oppression that has caused intergenerational trauma. Is there a way that understanding the role of images and intergenerational trauma can be relevant to us today? Now, we had two speakers for that. We have T and we have Tina, but I don't know if Tina's on or not.
It doesn't look like we were able to get the audio connected even.
Okay.
So
take it away, T.
Yeah.
Where do I start? I think I wanted to uplift first one of the questions that came in about the toolbox, some tools that we need to have in our toolkit. So I just have 4: sympathy, empathy, compassion, and grace. And so it's one of those things that I don't need to know and don't need to have walked through what you walked through, but I understand. And even if I did walk through, I overstand. And I understand that you're going to need your space to heal. And I'm going to give you that space because that's the compassion. And if you don't heal in the time that I tell you to, that's fine because you have grace to walk in your own healing. So sympathy, empathy, compassion, and grace, I think, are the things that people need to have in their toolbox as we kind of move forward with the continued movement. I don't want to say a new movement because it's been a continual movement. We just have a new leg and a new group of folks picking up the journey to kind of move it forward. But I think when we get into the conversation of intergenerational trauma, it goes back to some of the things that some of the sisters here has even lifted up of just kind of things that we've seen in our own home and in our own history and in our own community that don't ask, don't tell, that do as I say, not as I do, that leads to the intergenerational trauma, because we have the outside world telling us one thing, and then we see things differently in our home, but then we're expected to portray it differently outside of the walls of our home. And so those trauma points itself kind of adds to the different things that we have to unpack when we say that it's okay to not be okay. Some of those things come from our upbringing. I also want to lift up that when we talk about history, it's important to realize that we are in the history, we're forming history as we speak. And the era that we're living in now, and with this new generation, they're growing up in a hashtag era. So the history moving forward will be hashtags, unfortunately. And some folks are intentional about doing different things to make themselves part of this hashtag history. Whereas others, through no fault of their own, has become our own walking history, due to their deaths and the way that they have died, just as a Black person, for all of these different things. And so I think that if we look into that and look into the concept of the roles and the images, the roles now is not the Black man being lynched, hung from a tree. That's not the history that these kids are going to remember. That's deep in the books and the history that, we were talking about earlier, of the things that we need to know. But the images that these folks are going to have now is George Floyd. It is Trayvon Martin. It is Sandra Bland. It is so many more people, Breonna Taylor, all of these images that we have in our minds of the Black people that were doing absolutely nothing, and then ended up being a part of this hashtag movement. The other side that I wanted to make sure that I lifted up is that I think it's important for the historical context and the historical conversation. But I think that if it's a continual conversation, and Alexia and I have actually talked about this, and I've done it with a couple of my village folks as well, that I think if we live into a daily mindset that each day we're creating a history, either for ourselves or for our legacy or for those that are engaged with us, the same as we talk about Rosa Parks, right? At some point, someone in our era is going to be the new Rosa Parks. And so that person is walking, breathing, and involved in a movement now. And each one of us on the screen is a part of a history that is being created. And our family members are going to talk about us. They're going to talk about the movements to which we were involved in, the things that we try to push forward, the things that we may have held on and say, we're not getting involved in. But I think if everybody is intentional in their daily movement of knowing that you are creating a piece of history, we're able to not erase the stuff and the trauma from before, but we're able to create a new narrative of what that looks like moving forward.
Ooh, ooh, yeah. Clear, succinct, and to the point.
Yeah. So many pieces I just want to lift up, yes. But one from the audience that I think is very important. So as we were talking about the importance of sharing, it was share, and have confidence in each other. And then the CHEW Forum, again, that stands for Culture, Health, Education, and Wealth. This forum is the start of the solution. Mm-hmm. Trauma to Triumph is the start of the solution. The work that Monica has done as a mayor in a political position, the work that Sister Robin, I know we lost her along the way, little cell phone battery issues, but that's okay. And Brittany are doing, and Valerie and the educational system, Patricia and Kent for lifting up these opportunities. And then we have to shout out the African American Heritage Association of Richmond. Virginia, for lifting up this platform. These are the ways that we continue and we don't miss. And I did say, like, you all listening to you, again, especially Valerie, Patricia, and Monica, and Sister Robin, that's who Camille knows. I mean, she knows Rosa Parks and them too, but best right. She's going to know and does know, has heard me talk about. She knows LaFern Burton. She knows these names. And again, like Monica said, if we continue to share that way, then that's where it becomes even more vast and our stock just continues to go up. With that, I'm just going to kick it over to you, Patricia.
Yes. So first of all, I want to thank the panelists. You all are exceptional. We have about 11 women now who are donating their time on these Sundays to Knowledge Share. And is Eartha Eartha May still on? No, it's not Eartha May. She's my cousin. Is
Ray Eartha.
Ray Eartha? Yeah, is she still on?
She may be. She has been very active in the chat, so we
Right. She's
appreciate that.
someone I'm going to ask. She's in Brittany's and your age group. I'm going to ask her if she can lend her voice because it's a powerful voice. And so I want to thank each of you. And also I want to thank the audience. I want to let you know that Robin, not Robin, you know, I'm a baby boomer, so I get names mixed up sometimes. I want to thank Alexia, who next week will be moderating with me. From now on, she's going to be the co-moderator, and she's also the MC. She has boundless energy, as you all know. And we're going to start the next section of CHEW next week. And I think Monica started it for us today because the next section is on health. And we will have 3 different themes tied to health. So I hope that you will join us next week for that. And I will turn it over to Alexia.
Well, what an amazing and riveting dialogue we have absolutely had today. Yes, Ray Eartha was on. She was like, honored cousin.
Oh, yes. Will you do it with us? Just thumbs up.
Ray Eartha sound like she can cook real good.
She does. She does. I was wondering. I was thinking that very same thing.
And that picture is giving me some nice macaroni and cheese out the oven.
Kit, and you were right. Listen. Super excited. Thank you so much to everyone who tuned in. The chat has just been growing. Please be sure to share. You can watch the playback on YouTube. If you just go to YouTube and type in Patricia Evelyn Green, you can watch it on Facebook as well. And you want to share it, right? It does not cost anything at all to share. Nothing at all to share. So we want to do that because this is such a great conversation. We thank you all so much for not just surviving. I mean, we absolutely lift up the surviving, but the thriving.
That's
each
it.
of you in your own right. So I'm actually going to turn it over to the one who normally takes us out, Mrs. T. Pearson.
Oh yeah, you gonna let me take us out?
Why don't you go ahead and take us on out?
Hey, listen, we had a great conversation here today. We had some wonderful ladies that jumped on the screen, shared their time, their knowledge, and their intellectual wealth with us. It's our responsibilities now to share it. Each one teach one. It's another Sunday. You don't have to understand to overstand and to give a little bit of sympathy and grace. So sympathy, empathy, compassion, and grace, put them in your toolbox, and we'll catch you on the CHEW next week, baby. Peace, love, and hair grease to you.
Come on, y'all.
Turn up just a little bit on a Sunday. Let's party. And we don't own these rights. Don't try to get us kicked off YouTube. We don't know this. We don't own these records. We will survive, people, because we are a community. Each one teach one, lift one up, pull one with you. We're going to survive because we all we got, baby. See y'all next week on the CHEW.